Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining this information session presenting the 2020 Notice of Funding Opportunity for the National Endowment for the Humanities Education and Training Grant Program. My name is Mary Downs. I'm a Senior Program Officer and Program Coordinator for Education and Training. From the start, I want to tell you that at times I will be referring to the program as E&T, that is for Education and Training, and the Notice of Funding Opportunity as the NOFO for short. I'd like to take a moment to discuss the agenda for this webinar. I'll begin by discussing the programmatic objectives for education and training, including activities, eligibility, and the funding structures that we offer. Next, I'll discuss some of the changes to the program that we have implemented for this year. I'll mention some of the areas of special interest, as well as new eligible activities. Following a brief overview of these changes, I'll cover a few examples of awards that we have funded in recent years. I'll conclude the webinar by briefly going over the application review process, including the review criteria for education and training, some tips for preparing and submitting your application, and finally, other resources for learning more about this program. Education and Training is a grant program that is administered by NEH's Division of Preservation and Access, which is one of the 7 divisions and offices that run grant programs. The Preservation and Access Education and Training Program supports the development of knowledge and skills among professionals responsible for preserving and establishing access to humanities collections. Thousands of libraries, archives, museums, and historical organizations across the country maintain important collections of books and manuscripts, photographs, sound recordings and moving images, archaeological and ethnographic artifacts, art and material culture collections, electronic records, and digital objects. The challenge of preserving and making accessible such large and diverse holdings is enormous, and the need for knowledgeable staff is significant and ongoing. Preservation and Access Education and Training Awards are made to organizations that offer national, regional, or statewide education and training programs across the pedagogical landscape and at all stages of development, from early curriculum development to advanced implementation. Awards help the staff of cultural institutions, large and small, obtain the knowledge and skills needed to serve as effective stewards of humanities collections. Awards support projects that prepare the next generation of preservation professionals, as well as projects that introduce heritage practitioners to new information and advances in preservation and access practices. Applicants can request up to $350,000, and our deadline submission is June 11th of 2020 for all applications. Any U.S. nonprofit organization with 501c3 tax-exempt status, accredited public and 501c3 institutions of higher education, state and local governmental agencies, and federally recognized Native American tribal governments are eligible to apply for education and training. Individuals, along with foreign or for-profit entities, are not eligible to apply. There are a couple of issues that applicants ask us frequently. First, we caution our applicants to avoid including overlapping project costs if you're applying or have already received other funding opportunities. And consortia or partner applications are welcome. When 2 or more eligible institutions collaborate on a project, one must serve as the lead applicant. I'd like to talk about the various funding levels that we have. Programs that grant graduate degrees in art conservation may apply for up to $250,000 in outright funds and up to $100,000 in federal matching funds for a period of performance of not less than 3 years and up to 5 years. All other applicants may apply for up to $350,000 in outright funds or a combination of outright and matching funds that is not to exceed $350,000 for a period of performance of up to 3 years. Applicants may apply for funds to provide a 1-year postgraduate fellowship for emerging preservation professionals. These fellowships aim to bridge the gap between completion of graduate training and full-time employment by offering specialized training in preservation and access topics. Applicants may request funding for 1 fellowship each year of the period of performance. The maximum stipend for a 1-year fellowship is $45,000. The award ceiling may not exceed $350,000. I wanted to talk about the changes that we've made in the 2020 Notice of Funding Opportunity. The first is that the fellowship opportunity is now available across all grant categories, that is, in preservation field services, continuing education, and graduate programs in art conservation, and other preservation and access related programs, such as archival management, library and information sciences, and museum studies programs. These fellowships aim to bridge the gap between completion of graduate training and full-time employment by offering training in preservation and access topics. We have also expanded the opportunities to include professional development for emerging specialists in preservation and access in the continuing education category. Applicants may now include fellowships, apprenticeships, mentorships, and residencies. We are also highlighting partnership opportunities between academic and non-academic institutions for preservation and access related educational initiatives. These might include, for instance, a partnership between a collecting institution and a graduate program to provide fellowships for work on collections care and management. We are also highlighting partnership opportunities between academic institutions. And we have expanded the language for reaching underserved audiences. Areas of special interest include training in culturally appropriate practices for collections from underrepresented communities, and this is the part that is new, other activities that support the educational needs of preservation and access practitioners in diverse institutional geographic, educational, and demographic settings. And finally, graduate art conservation programs may now apply for up to $100,000 in federal matching funds, in addition to the $250,000 that they may apply for in outright funds. I want to draw your attention to 4 areas of special interest. And with these, I want to emphasize that if you've got a project that doesn't seem to fit into one of these areas, of course you should still apply. These areas of interest, they're only intended as a guide for potential applicants and just as areas that we are particularly interested in, and they're not meant to privilege certain types of projects over others. The 4 areas of special interest are disaster and emergency preparedness and response, culturally appropriate practices for collections from underrepresented communities, including but not limited to Native American, First Nation, and Indigenous communities, and other activities that support the educational needs of preservation and access practitioners in diverse institutional, geographic, educational, and demographic settings. The 3rd area is preventive conservation and sustainable preservation strategies. We also have a special interest in preservation techniques and access solutions for audiovisual, digital, and time-based media. I'd also like to mention our special encouragement that covers the significant work involved in preserving cultural heritage materials that may be imperiled due to armed conflict, war, looting, natural disasters, economic development, poor management, and tourism. This special interest appears in several of our grant programs entitled Protecting Our Cultural Heritage, and you will find a link to more information about it in our posted Notice of Funding Opportunity for the Education and Training Program. I do want to highlight one area of special interest that is of reaching underrepresented communities. In the Education and Training Program, we encourage projects that pursue the education and training needs associated with the work of preserving humanities collections for all communities. For some types of institutions, for instance, minority serving institutions, tribal colleges and universities, community colleges, and smaller heritage institutions such as public libraries, historical societies, archives, or museums, the education and training funds may help to implement important projects that otherwise couldn't be done. For that reason, we'd like to see proposals for training individuals who are responsible for preserving humanities collections at smaller institutions or institutions with limited capacities or that serve underrepresented audiences. Over the years, the Education and Training Program has supported fantastic projects that have tackled issues of preservation and access for Indigenous communities and for digital training for smaller institutions, to name just two examples. I also wanted to draw your attention to our special initiative, A More Perfect Union, which is NEH's special initiative advancing civic education and commemorating the nation's 250th anniversary. As our nation approaches its 250th anniversary in 2026, NEH encourages projects that promote a deeper understanding of American history and culture and that advance civic education and knowledge of our core principles of government. The agency-wide A More Perfect Union initiative will help Americans better understand the world's oldest constitutional democracy and how our founding ideals are met in a modern pluralistic society. NEH welcomes consideration of diverse topics in American history, from Native American culture to rural life, to the rise of the industrial city, from the Civil War to the Cold War to the Civil Rights Movement. We also seek projects that examine foundational documents in U.S. history, as well as projects that examine historical objects, places, traditions, events, and individuals who collectively shaped our states and nation. Applications about the contributions of underrepresented communities are highly encouraged. If you think that you have a project that fits in with A More Perfect Union, please be in touch with us to discuss whether this is an appropriate application for the Education and Training Program. And now I'd like to highlight a few examples of recent awards in the Education and Training Program. Just this year, we supported the Midwest Art Conservation Center, a regional preservation field service program that strengthens preservation practices and the care of humanities collections at hundreds of museums, historical organizations, libraries, and archives in the 5 states of the Upper Midwest. The activities that they are undertaking include training workshops, disaster response services, preservation needs assessments and surveys, the loan of environmental monitoring equipment, and information and outreach services. The award is also supporting training for 2 Native American Conservation Fellows as part of its Native American Collections Care Fellowship Program, which began in 2018. This program strengthens the preservation practices and collections care at cultural repositories in the Upper Midwest, resulting in increased public access. The program has demonstrated successful outcomes and measurable results, keeps its programming accessible to even the smallest institutions in the region, and is staffed by knowledgeable conservators and preservation experts, and is devoted to the Midwest's region's collections. And in 2019, NEH awarded the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation a grant to undertake training for emergency preparation and response for humanities collections as part of its Alliance for Response network. Through this project, FAIC, as they are known, will improve emergency preparation and response for humanities collections by creating a new Alliance for Response network of cultural leaders and emergency managers in Oklahoma. They will also train a regional volunteer response team for cultural collections in Georgia, and they will provide nationwide training and resources for the 27 existing Alliance for Response networks across the nation. A large portion of the existing Heritage Emergency Response Team training, now conducted primarily through face-to-face instruction, has been adapted for online delivery, resulting in lower costs and less travel time for participants, and making the training more easily reproducible for other locations in the future. And in 2019, NEH awarded New York University an Education and Training Award to develop a curriculum for collaborative curation of Native American cultural heritage collections. Training of 50 to 70 staff in 6 cultural heritage institutions across the United States, and assessment and evaluation of the training, as well as testing of 2 new traditional knowledge labels, and creation of a collaborative curation center for online sharing of the curriculum and resources. The purpose of this education and training grant is to increase knowledge and skills for the ongoing preservation and curation of Indigenous cultural heritage materials. The grant allows the local contexts team at NYU to build out a specialized intellectual property rights and Native American collections curriculum that provides specialized training on intellectual property and digitization for Native American collections, and advanced training in the collaborative preservation and curation digital tools that they have developed. And lastly, I wanted to highlight support for graduate education in art conservation. At the University of Delaware, education and training funding supports partial stipends to 10 master's level students over 2 years in the following areas of specialization: objects, paper, photographs, or textiles. Students may also subspecialize in areas such as modern and contemporary art, time-based media, and preventive conservation. I should note that support for graduate education is not limited to art conservation programs, but may also be used for preservation and access related educational initiatives that might include partnerships between academic and non-academic institutions, student financial support, curriculum development, speaker series, and travel, as well as fellowships or internships towards a master's degree, such as library science, museum studies, and archival administration. The first stage in NEH's application review process is peer review. A panel of outside experts with relevant knowledge evaluates a group of applications. The reviewers read the applications and make preliminary comments and ratings. Then they meet to discuss them as a group. For the education and training program, the reviewers are usually administrators of cultural heritage institutions, museum educators, preservation specialists in libraries, conservators, along with specialists in areas such as Native American cultural heritage, disaster response, or audiovisual preservation. I'm not going to go over each review criterion separately, but I will note that the set of criteria listed here applies to all projects. And I just want to point out that we're looking at the national, regional, or statewide impact of the proposed activities, the soundness of the methodology, the proposed plans to evaluate project activities and outcomes, the training and experience of the staff in relation to the activity, and the reasonableness of the project's budget in relation to anticipated results. I would point out that project evaluation is an important criterion and one that may be expressed differently depending on what the context is for your proposal. Your discussion of how you will evaluate the results of your project can be a key indicator of the viability of your project and the extent to which you will hold yourself accountable for its timely success. Here are the major components you'll need to create and assemble for your application. A full listing of all materials appears in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Some of the materials are standard forms, but for many of them, you'll prepare a document and ultimately save it as a PDF for uploading into grants.gov. Please follow formatting requirements and naming conventions carefully. Again, most of these items are straightforward, but I would like to point out a few things. Our agency has shifted to using a standard budget form called the Research and Related Budget Form. A separate budget justification is required, and that provides the requested information about certain budget items listed. You may also use the budget justification to include cost share. But please understand that cost sharing is voluntary and may be used in instances where the total costs exceed the amount awarded by NEH. I should also point out that cost sharing is not considered in the evaluation of applications. It's not a review criterion. You will find detailed information in the Notice of Funding Opportunity explaining how to complete the budget form. But should you have any additional questions about the budget, we encourage you to reach out to our colleagues in the Office of Grant Management who can assist you. Something else that is new for this year is that we're requiring applicants to supply a detailed work plan as a separate attachment. In your main narrative, you'll want to outline the activities for your project. The attached work plan should be used to provide a more comprehensive timeline. E&T projects are typically complex, often containing overlapping activities and multiple responsibilities for project personnel. It's important that you explain succinctly how each activity informs subsequent work and how you'll coordinate project partners or outside collaborators. The narrative is your opportunity to make the strongest possible case for your project. Don't assume that reviewers know anything about your institution or project beyond what you present in the narrative and application. While it may seem obvious, we cannot emphasize enough that the best narratives are those that adhere to the sections outlined in the Notice of Funding Opportunity and address all review criteria. Perhaps one of the most difficult challenges for education and training applicants is striking the right balance of overall impact of the project and detailed information about the delivery of the training. Your application will be reviewed by a range of readers with various backgrounds, as I noted earlier. Many reviewers may be your peers, and so it is important that you demonstrate your knowledge of the field and the most recent research or literature. On the other hand, successful applications are those that can explain the significance of your E&T work for a general educated audience who may be more interested in how your work will have an impact on the work of the humanities. Letters of support are optional, but they can be effective in affirming the impact that your project will have in the preservation field and on the humanities. Applications for NEH grants, like many federal grants, are submitted through a web portal called grants.gov. If you are new to the system, I would recommend spending some time getting familiar with it before you submit your application. Your institution, if it has not done so already, needs to register at least a month before applying. We strongly urge that you apply early, as the system can get overwhelmed in the minutes before midnight on those days of the deadline. Grants.gov support is available 24/7. All NEH grant applications go through a lengthy review process, which has several stages. The first stage, and what we consider the foundation for our entire review process, is the peer review panel. Evaluators read the applications, write comments, and post a rating. Then they meet to discuss the applications. Following peer review, NEH staff recommends which applications should move forward. Those recommendations are considered by the National Council on the Humanities. 26 people, scholars and others, nominated by the President and approved by the Senate. The National Council makes recommendations to the endowment's chairman, who takes all this into consideration and makes the decision on which applications to fund. It's a long process, but it allows for rich review. After awards are announced, applicants can request the comments from their evaluators. If your proposal is not funded, the reviewer's comments can help you think about how to revise your proposal for the next time. We've got lots of general tips and strategies for submitting a competitive application, but I wanted to just focus on a couple of aspects of the application process here. I've got a couple of common errors up on the screen here for you. Common errors include ignoring the guidelines or not following them carefully, applying for the wrong grant program, not making the case for significance. That is very important. You need to make the case for humanities significance of your project. Another common mistake is waiting until the last minute to get things done on grants.gov. You want to make sure that you have that done in plenty of time. Not having a complete or having an unrealistic work plan. You really want to think through, how are we going to do this? How long is this going to take? Who needs to be responsible for this? Do they have enough time? Just be very careful about laying out your work plan. Another common mistake might be a budget that doesn't align with the project. You say one thing in the application, but something different in the budget. And very important advice is to read, and proofread again. I want to say that in the case of education and training, we sometimes receive projects that are focused on training staff at a particular institution. And I just want to say that those kinds of activities, when they're not tied to contributing to the broader knowledge of the preservation field, may not end up being competitive, and they may actually be ineligible. You want to make sure that your education and training project has a broad impact on the field of preservation, education, and training. We have several programs that are dedicated to preserving your institutional collections, and that would be a different kind of a project. We don't want you to put a lot of work into preparing your application only to discover that your project would have been better suited to another NEH program. And for that reason, I encourage you to be in touch with us at the Division of Preservation and Access at any time in the application process to speak to a program officer about your project to ensure that you're applying to the right program. As I mentioned before, always keep in mind that humanities are central to what we do at NEH. It's the primary lens through which we view all grant proposals, even those that are geared towards preservation or access, education, and training. Finally, applicants often get into trouble when they don't plan ahead. You want to make sure that you have enough time to study the guidelines, plan your project, consult with your partners, talk to collaborators and your administration, draft your application, and get feedback from colleagues. So please ensure that you've got enough time to put your application together. I know I've presented a lot of information in a compact format. You can find the Notice of Funding Opportunity along with other useful information, such as sample successful application narratives, on our website at www.neh.gov. If there's nothing else that you take away from this webinar, it should be that program staff are always available to assist you with questions about preparing and submitting your application. Program officers are available to read drafts submitted to our preservation email account, listed on the slide here, no later than April 30th. Even if your draft is not fully developed, this can be a helpful and informative exercise. So I think I'm going to end there, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend this webinar. Let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.